Hello, hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the July Fireside Chat from the SONA Foundation and in partnership with Backline. These are monthly conversations where we talk with guest songwriters and clinical counselors from the Backline team about various mental health issues. These are really human experiences that are not necessarily unique to songwriters. However, the fact that we are all songwriters and we have our unique experience in the music industry and as artists, these have a bent that is especially pertinent to those of us who are in this industry and working as artists. So I'm very, very happy to once again bring on our Backline team and our special guest today, Robby Hecht. But before I do that, I want to let you know that we have a recent program that was launched not too long ago called the Therapy Assistance Project. And we are just starting to roll out that project. We have sent out our first round of recipients for this new TAP Therapy Assistance Project grant, which helps to provide financial assistance for songwriters so that they can access therapy. And we're working really closely with Backline for those folks who would like therapy but don't actually have a current therapist and need help finding one. So Backline has been a really great partner and resource as part of our TAP program. And if you're interested to hear more about that and the other offerings from us over here at the SONA Foundation, please visit our website, SONA Foundation. And I'll put that link in the chat box. And speaking of chat box, while you are looking at it, please let us know where you are tuning in from. I'm going to bring on Terra Lopez, who is community manager at Backline and a wonderful conversation facilitator. It's an honor, Terra, always to have you as part of these conversations. Thank you for being here.
Oh, likewise. I'm so excited. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, I'm going to take myself out of the screen so that you can kick off the conversation today. See you in an hour.
Awesome. Sounds great. Hey, everyone. I'm Terra Lopez. I'm the community manager and head of artist partnerships at Backline. For those who don't know me, we have a very special fireside chat with the SONA Foundation this month. As most of you know, Backline is a resource hub for the music industry, and we provide the industry with tools and resources for mental health and wellness care. And we've teamed up with the SONA Foundation for these very special fireside chats to talk about mental health for songwriters. So today we have a very special guest. We have Robby Hecht. Robby has been captivating audiences as a touring singer-songwriter for over 2 decades. He has a remarkable blend of insightful lyrics, memorable melodies, and a voice that carries both strength and tenderness. And his music resonates with audiences all over the world. He's won a number of revered songwriting contests. He's toured across the US and Europe, and he's amassed over 25 million streams to date. We also have Backline's clinical director, Ari Jacobson. Ari heads Backline's clinical team and our case management program and is a valuable member of the Backline team. He has helped build a robust national clinical network of mental health and wellness providers for the music community. Ariel is going to be moderating the chat box, so please feel free to drop any questions that you might have, and I will definitely try to get to them. So let's have our guests join us today. Hey, Robby. Hey, Ari.
Hello.
Hey.
How's it going?
So good.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So we are chatting today about bipolar disorder, which is the most common and the most stigmatized health disorders. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation. I think that there is so much that we could get into about one's personal experience. And Ari, I would love to start with you to kind of just go over briefly what even is bipolar disorder and how does it differ from other mood disorders?
Sure. I want to start off by prefacing that for anybody listening, this does not count as any form of medical diagnosis. You may relate to something that is said. If that is the case, I really, really encourage you to talk to your primary care doctor, talk to a psychiatrist, talk to a therapist, and get formally diagnosed. As we talk through a lot of these, you will also hear me, or you will kind of see that a lot of these are misdiagnosed very commonly. So just to preface that anything we talk about today, to please do not take as a formal diagnosis and to rely on a licensed professional. But with that being said, so bipolar disorder is a Disorder that includes two very differing types of moods. So you're going to have your highs, which are going to be like your manic episodes, and then you're going to have your lows, which are going to be your depressive episodes, and they come in waves. There are different types of bipolar disorder, which may have different lengths of your waves, but overall, you're going to have similarly just highs and lows that kind of switch back and forth, and then you'll have a period of uh, baseline, kind of a whatever you're going to consider normal. The highs are going to have very clear symptoms, which are going to be things like um, you're not going to need a whole lot of sleep. You're going to have a whole lot of energy. You might be more talkative. You might think more highly of yourself. You might try things. You might be a little bit more risky in your behavior. So maybe you're scared of heights, but maybe now you're willing to try something like skydiving. You might make decisions that you wouldn't necessarily make. You also might put yourself in situations that you don't necessarily normally put yourself in. The opposite side of those is the depressive episodes, which are going to be your lows. That's kind of your common ones that people might talk of where they spend a lot of time sleeping, still feel tired, no appetite, long term depression, could even change weight, whether you gain or lose it, and it's unexpected or it's unexplained. So maybe you're not eating a ton of food, but you're still gaining a lot of weight. You're going to have low self care. You might find that you're not paying attention to things like showering or just basic daily needs. And then also just feelings of worthlessness, sadness during the days, and just um, pretty low. The biggest difference with bipolar disorder is the actual like secular motion of it. So it's actually going to have both the highs and the lows. People who are ones who just struggle with depression are going to have periods or bouts of depression, but they're not necessarily going to be as routine or regular. Bipolar disorder, especially nowadays with different kinds of treatments and medications, is better managed, but it still definitely has a cycle that goes through everything. And that's what's going to really separate it from some of the other disorders.
Mm. Thank you for breaking that all down. Robby, would you be open to sharing your journey with bipolar disorder?
Sure. I am pretty sure a lot of people say it kind of comes on later in life or something, but I'm pretty sure I've experienced this my whole life. Like I remember as a kid just being like, why am I this way? Um,
Mm.
and a lot of it was when I think back, it's like weird that I wasn't just like, oh, obviously I'm manic depressive, you know? Like, because in my head, I was like two different people at the same time. Like I was,
Mhm.
oh, I'm outgoing and also I'm really shy and I don't know who I'm going to be at any given time, sort of subconsciously. So it's hard to like make plans or or I would like be like, that's going to be awesome. I'm going to sign up for that. And then like when it comes around, I just want to hide in the closet and like not go do the thing. So it's just really difficult to like do life, I guess. Or like as a singer-songwriter, like it was kind of impossible to tour. Um,
Mm.
any show might be like amazing or a horrible nightmare, just depending on whether I'm like was able to feel good about myself and be in front of people. Um, and I guess it was around when I was um, probably like 27. Um, my girlfriend who became my wife, who became my former wife, but at the time, she was my girlfriend who I lived with, and she was like, "Hey, this is how you're being," and like it was just like you're like this sometimes and like this other times, and I don't know which one I'm gonna get, and I was just like, "Oh, well, maybe I'm bipolar." Like just I needed like somebody with perspective to just be like, "This is what you're like," um, out of pure frustration, just like I don't know what to do with this. So I went to the doctor and filled out a questionnaire and like it was like, yeah, you're probably bipolar. And at the time, like this was like 2006 or something, bipolar was still like a really scary word. Like it
Mhm.
sounded very similar to insane. Um, and there were a lot of things where someone would do something crazy and then in the media they'd be like, I found out I was bipolar, and everyone would be like, they're making excuses, you know? Um,
Mhm.
and Yeah, so I went through like the journey of trying to find the right medication with a couple different doctors, um, which is really difficult. because you'll take something and you kind of don't know if it's working because you don't have any perspective. You don't know if you would have been manic or depressed before you took it. So, and if you're manic, you're like, it's working, I feel amazing. And then like later you're like, I guess it maybe wasn't working. Um, and yeah, eventually I landed on something, and you have to kind of like ease your way up it's called lamotrigine, but you have to kind of ease your way up taking it, because there's like a very rare situation where it causes rashes in people. So it's like hard to tell if it's working as you're ramping up the dosage. And then eventually I was just kind of like, oh, I feel like I'm like, instead of like this, I'm like this. And that's kind of
Mm.
how my life is now, 16 years later. Is it's just like I still have mood cycles, but they're way more manageable than they used to be.
How
That's
did
kind of
that
my
feel?
basic journey.
Yeah, no, thank you. You were 27 when you went to the doctor. How, and like you were saying, and even now, back in 2006, and even into now, it's still so stigmatized in our society. How did you feel when you were told by your doctor that you had bipolar disorder?
Well, I mean, I felt really relieved
Hmm.
that I could put the name on like how I felt, and like could then kind of seek out other stories of people and be like, am I similar to that? And have I experienced that? Um, and it just kind of, it's like the beginning of maybe I can do something about this. And it's like talk therapy. Like as soon as you figure out your problem, you're not done. It's like the beginning. Um, so then it was just like a long journey of trying to find a way to like live with it. Um, and it wasn't like I was a horrible person before, but I would just like make bad choices sometimes. But also I was like really, really like, I guess, timid and didn't know where my emotions were going to be at any given time. So I was really deferential, um, and cautious, which I still kind of am. Um, but I lost the track of the question.
No, no worries. I would love to. You mentioned medication, and I think that that's
Uh-huh.
such an important conversation to have, especially amongst creatives and songwriters, because I'm a manic depressive and I take medication, and it took so many years for me to finally feel like, okay,
Mm,
I'm going to try this, because I was so worried about the stigma of, oh, you take medication, you're going to lose creativity, you're going to lose your emotions, and the spectrum of emotions. And so it really hindered me from, getting
mhm.
the help that I needed. Were you ever worried about medication affecting your creativity or the songwriting process? Was that a conversation that you ever had with yourself or with others?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because that's who you are. Like that's your default, I guess.
Mm.
Um, I mean, the medication thing is like there's different levels of like questioning it. There's like, is it going to take away my creativity? Is it am I like being lazy? Like, is there some other way to deal with this? Like, because you're like, as you're learning your life, like all of your instincts are based on having manic and depressive episodes. So like, I'm still like learning, like, okay, I can like agree to this and I'll be okay in 2 weeks when the time comes to do the thing that I said I would do. Like, it's still scary because my instinct is like, I don't know who I'm going to be that day, even though it's like way more manageable now. Um, so there's that aspect of it. Like, yeah, because it's like with the manic episodes, it's like all the creativity happens at once and you have to like capture it before it's gone. Um, and I just had to like, once I started taking medication, it was like, okay, well, the other side of this is unmanageable. And so I just had to sort of like reacclimate to the new way that my brain worked. I don't know if you had that experience, but like, um, I just kind of got used to figuring out how to be creative through like discipline and just like kind of capturing it in a different way than like letting it attack me and having to grab it or something.
Yeah, for me, I really had to rely on a routine once I started taking medication, because the same way
Mhm.
I would, create in those sporadic bursts. But as soon as I started taking medication, a routine became very important to me. And just showing up every day, whether or not I created or not, is still something that I practice, because I do feel like I need that structure in order to just be able to feel like I can tap into that creativity, or at least try. Ari, what do you say to individuals, creative folks who come to you that also maybe are a bit skeptical about medication, or are, have the same fears that Robby and I had in regards to affecting our creativity?
So I think the number one thing is to remember that you are in charge of your own decisions. And if you are working with a doctor who is not making you feel that way, then it may be time to explore for another provider. You are the one who's going to know what feels right, what feels wrong. Unfortunately, aside from like scientific brain scans, right now psychiatry is a very opinion-based interaction. So how are you feeling? I'm feeling good. Okay, great. So your meds are working. As Robby also said, some of the meds take 2 to 3 weeks to kick in. And then unfortunately, if you decide to stop taking some of them you have to wean off of, and you kind of are unable to use like another week or two. So you have to be really intentional about what you're looking for and what you really need. So also, if you're noticing that things like your creativity is not able to kind of get through whatever you are feeling, then making sure that you might just be on a wrong dose, you might be on a wrong medication, and being honest and transparent with your prescriber isn't going to make them. It's not going to trigger any red flags, or it shouldn't. It's not going to make it seem like you're med seeking for anything in particular. It's that you're being very honest about, these are not working for me, and I'm still experiencing those the negative symptoms of whatever it is. You want your medication to be helpful. You don't want your medication to become you. And there is a point where, as medications stabilize and you're feeling better and you've developed really good coping skills and you feel like you can manage, then certain medications definitely aren't intended to be forever. Some medications, as long as they're working, to maintain them is probably going to be something that you also will decide, just to keep the routine going and to be able to keep the support that you have and you've developed. But the biggest thing is just to remember that the medications need to work for you, and you also need to comply. So if you are supposed to be taking medications in a certain way, you should take them as prescribed, because the only way the doctor can actually get it right is if they know that you actually are taking them the way they're supposed to be taken.
That's important to know. Robby, talking about routines or habits, do you have any that you do on a daily basis that helps you stay grounded?
Well, the most important thing, at least for how my thing works, is I just need to get enough sleep. Like and maybe not too little and not too much, but just like 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep. It's just one of many things that can kind of stabilize your brain, but like not getting sleep will just trigger a manic episode. And then like from my experience, it's like a depressive episode is caused by the manic episode. Just it's manic and then depressed, and then who knows, like if I'm back on my medication. Medication wise, like just to kind of go back to what you were saying with the doctor relationship, like it's not like, it's so different from when you go to the doctor and they're like, your bone's broken, here's what we should do. Like there's no evidence that anything's wrong except what you say. So like, and it's really hard. You go into the doctor and you're like manic. You want to just go like, everything's great. Like that's because you feel like everything's great, even though you kind of know I'm lying. Like I'm like very not baseline right now. So it's hard you have to be really honest with yourself about that. And then it's very hard. Like it's very hard to find the right dose and be honest and get any perspective, because you've never had perspective on this stuff like your whole life. So all of your instincts are like, I want to feel comfortable the way that I was. And then there's a lot of them have a lot of side effects, so you have to weigh the side effects. But then I listen to this podcast called the Mental Illness Happy Hour, and he's always talking about, which is super right on, like you have to think about what the side effects are of not taking the medication, because it's very similar to like doing cocaine like all the time, you know? It's like your brain's just like, I'm gonna release all the good stuff and then totally run out and then be really sad afterwards. And it's like the medication is like making your brain function like it's not on drugs, is like my experience of taking medication,
Mhm.
which is it's an interesting way to look at it because it doesn't make you feel like you're a slave to medication or something. It's kind of like turning that off more than
Hmm.
anything.
And
Um,
especially
yeah.
nowadays, if you talk to your provider, there are testing options that can happen where you can swab the inside of your mouth, send a Q-tip in just to
Mm.
show genetic testing, and then you can get a list of medications that are better options for you, just like what you
Wild,
metabolize
really?
better. Yeah.
Oh,
And I'm located in Maryland. For anybody watching, I can only speak for what goes on in Maryland, more or less. But for like state insurances, for private insurances, it's covered. And it sends a very simple thing to your provider. The provider has to opt into it, but what it does is it can help avoid you feeling like that guinea pig period of seeing if like one medication should work over another. It's going to tell you what you metabolize faster and more effectively. But to be able to ask your provider, like, how do you make decisions as to what medications to use? I think it's important to know, make sure that your provider doesn't have a relationship with a drug company that is just trying to, encourage one medication rather than trying to find what's best for you. Because
Mm.
especially if you're going to see a primary care doctor or an outpatient therapist, or psychiatrist, excuse me, you have options. You're going to be there. There's a wide range of different medications that are all kind of working for different things. So also to be very honest about your symptoms will also help your provider kind of figure out what's best. Because Robbie, like you said, manic episodes, some of them are extreme to the extreme. Some of them are people. I've worked with a client who during his manic episodes, he was his hands down his most productive. He cleaned,
Mhm.
he wrote, he did everything he needed to do, but he would crash so hard that then he'd enter into like a 2 week depressive episode, and it just wasn't effective for him. So
Yeah, it's kind
not
of like
everybody.
overall.
Yeah, and if we're really kind of looking at the differences of bipolar disorders, there's the bipolar 1 disorder, which is going to have your true manic episode with the true depressive episode. Bipolar 2 is more of the hypomanic, so it's just like a little of a bump and then a depressive episode. And people are commonly referred to that more or less as like a walking bipolar, because people
Mm.
aren't necessarily with bipolar 2 having the like major extreme episodes, and they're just going like, oh, I'm feeling really good today. Oh, now I'm depressed. And people tend to avoid seeking out services because it doesn't impact in the same way the bipolar 1 disorder does with a lot of people. So sometimes just being able to sit
Right.
with your doctor and saying like, oh, I am having manic episodes, but they look like this for me. Or when I'm depressed, I don't feel sad, but I also don't shower for a week. Like
mm,
those kinds of things will help a provider differentiate depending on which medications to also try.
Yeah, I remember like when I was taking the original questionnaire, like it had questions like, do I think I'm the savior of the world or something? Like there's
Hmm.
it does seem like I'm bipolar too, but it seems like the difference is like one, it crosses into that territory.
mm.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
I had a relative who was like, he would be manic and he was like, I'm writing a 9-hour rock opera, like it was just kind of like things no one's
Uh,
ever done because they're insane. Like, yeah.
I can tell you, I had just right off the top of my head, I've had three different clients who have had some pretty significant manic episodes. One purchased a small plane during a manic episode.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and it was really interesting because as that's all happening, you're explaining to him like you just purchased a small plane, and he had a history of being a pilot. He had thought about it for a long
Mm,
time, so he was like, "No, I finally had the opportunity to do it." But if you took a big step back, you notice that he hadn't slept in 4 days. He
mm,
hadn't showered in longer. He was not only going to buy a plane, but he was also going to fly it to wherever to go start this new life. Like there were just more elaborate plans than just the idea of what was really driving the decision. And that's kind of once he was able to sit in an office or pace back and forth in an office, we were able to actually like talk to him about the plan for it. And he's like, "Oh, I just realized I'm in the middle of a manic episode." Um,
mm.
so yeah, sometimes those, especially those severe manic episodes, can really trigger some very elaborate and extensive decisions that can be detrimental at times, and at other times it might just be that you stayed up and you painted your entire basement a brand new color. So it's not always harmful, but it's not usually productive.
Hmm. Robby, during these episodes, whether manic or depressive states, how do you find the balance for creativity or, just a balance in general?
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking about having a routine, like it used to be you would just wait for it and then you'd have to drop everything and be creative until it goes away. That might mean staying up all night or writing, into the night, or like it just became, and then it become more manic because you're not sleeping and it's just like, and then I could just like feel it. I kept a mood journal before I started taking medication. That was like part of being like, whoa, like, because it would just be like, I'm kind of a rapid cycler. Some people, I have a friend who'll go 5 months manic and then be sad for a year. Like it's really different experience than what I have. So I would be like 3 days, like I'm feeling really good, and then it would be like I can feel myself falling through a dark hole. Like it was wild. Yeah, so I just had to retrain myself to have like a routine. For a while, I was getting up in the morning and writing for 2 hours before my day started. Um, and I found that like doing that kind of stuff and co-writing with people too was good because it forced me into that headspace. Um, I could like write just as well, if not better, just by sitting down with it than like waiting for the magic to happen. But I did have to, like, in order to maintain that and not give it up, like there was some level of like I have to put myself in the situation to be creative, not just um, fall back on my old instincts of just like waiting for it to happen the same way.
Hmm.
Not that I'm never like inspired anymore, but that like everything makes sense is like
Right.
that doesn't happen anymore. Yeah.
This is a question for both of you. What do you think people get wrong about bipolar disorder?
That you're dangerous. Um,
Mm,
there are plenty of people who have very intense manic episodes, and for lack of a better term, they're a lot of fun. They're just happy, excited people. They're excited to do anything, and it's more that they just have this unmanageable burst of energy for a long period of time and really burning the candle at both ends. Um,
mhm.
Also, that I remember even 10 years ago, a client who couldn't get a job because they would tell people that they had bipolar disorder and people thought that they were unreliable or wouldn't come to work or anything like
Unreliable,
that,
yeah.
which also is just not true. Robby, it's still, even nowadays, you still really encourage people who are even diagnosed, taking medication and treatment, to keep a mood journal, because it's going to be something that is going to be your first trigger to say, oh, usually I can sit and eat breakfast in the morning and today I can't sit still. It's going to be your first thing to trigger that. But um, nowadays, especially as honestly social media has grown and the ability to have these conversations has become more normalized, I think we all can take a big step back and realize that we've probably worked with people who are diagnosed with bipolar, are currently working, know people, have friends, family, and it's just become um, a, something that's better managed nowadays, also with better treatment, better access to providers, those kinds of things. But yeah, I remember a very clear time when people who were diagnosed with bipolar were seen as erratic, dangerous, unreliable, which just has proven time and time again not true. People sometimes can be erratic, unreliable, but not. We can't generalize it all by people with bipolar.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's true. It doesn't help that there's like two things with the same name too. Like,
Uh,
you know, like no one ever
yeah,
says bipolar 2 or bipolar 1. You just say bipolar and nobody knows which one it is. And it's kind of, I don't know. Not that
and
that's horrible to be bipolar 1, but they are really different.
very
Um,
different. And I will tell you, just like especially in like the Baltimore area, for a long time, if people just got upset easily, it was just socially common to say that they're bipolar,
right.
meaning like they're fine one minute and not fine the other. And that
Just
in
having
terms of like,
moods.
yeah, in terms of mood disorders, just because you have bipolar disorder, a negative interaction with somebody wouldn't like trigger a manic episode. That's a different type of reactive disorder that's not bipolar related. You may also have bipolar symptoms, and those kind of stressors might trigger some reactions, but you're not gonna. have somebody tell you to screw off, and suddenly now you're in a 3-week manic episode. And so
Right.
just when I was first learning to diagnose, it was very common that people would come in and say, "Oh, my friends say I'm bipolar," and it's like, well, it sounds like you have maybe a mood disorder, but you don't have sleep disorders. You don't put yourself in risky situations. You're not have this burst of energy kind of thing. You just get angry easily.
Yeah, it's not situational.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Going back to the notion or stigma that folks with bipolar disorder are unreliable, Robby, was that ever a concern for you, specifically within the music industry, of letting those around you, whether it's fellow songwriters or just music industry professionals, with letting them know that you did have bipolar disorder? Were you ever worried that folks would, think that you might be unreliable or some other kind of stigma around that?
Maybe. I think it's easier now. And I think just the medication being more acceptable, and
Mm.
like I think people kind of get that helps, It's not like, and I feel like, I don't know, maybe people still just like go off of it and say like I'm fine now, but I think just the knowledge is out there more that like it doesn't fix you
Mhm.
necessarily. Like it's something that you kind of live with. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's that fear. When I put a record out in 2014, I kind of like came out as bipolar at the same time. Like just it felt like a good opportunity, and some of the songs were along those lines, and um, it felt like I had, just from the media of doing that, I had a platform to actually talk about it. Um, and it definitely got like halfway through putting the record out, I was like, I really would rather just be talking about the record right now. Like it is kind of like, I don't know. It was a little bit of a distraction to have to talk about it all the time in the context of not that. Um,
Mhm.
that's not really related to how people perceive me, but I mean, there is like, I guess there, I don't know. I don't want it to like define me, I guess. I found out, um, even though it is like part of me, like I don't think it's bad, I like,
Right.
and people can hear it that way, but it's just my personality a little bit, and I just have to kind of dumb it down a little with this medication. But I'm still somebody who is kind of, doing the thing that's not, it's not situational. I think it's important too in your relationships to tell people like it's not your fault. Like if you're
Mm.
in a bad mood, just to kind of be like, this has nothing to do with you, as much as you can. Um, because it's really, and just be like, this is just like where I'm at in my thing. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
not, this isn't anything you did. This isn't anything that's going on between us. Um, I don't know. And I think people eventually just respect that that's like who you are. And it's really common in the music industry anyway, like
Right.
in the
Mm-hmm.
creative industry. And
Yeah.
it's nice that we can talk about it, because poets used to kill themselves all the time,
Right.
like like it was just like, let's not talk about it. And then somebody dies and you're like, well, they were just a poet,
Mhm.
it was like 25% or something.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I heard some stat at some point, like committed suicide or something. Like it was like a way higher percentage than the rest of society. They kind of go together somehow.
Mm-hmm.
It's very weird.
No, it's it's really important what you bring up about communicating to those around you that maybe you're feeling a certain way, but it might not necessarily have anything to do with the other person, or the situation you're in, or that. I think that's so important to remember, to be able to communicate to others so that they
Mhm.
know what's going on with you, and also it doesn't create a whole other type of stressor that's completely unnecessary. But you bring up a
It's
good
very
point.
lonely if you can't talk about it. It's very
Mm,
lonely if you're not
Mm-hmm.
able to talk about it. Yeah.
you bring up a really good point about I want to talk about support systems, because I think that that's so important, regardless, just in general in life, but specifically dealing with a mental health disorder. This is a question for both of y'all. What role does your support system play in in the person's journey, and for you, Robby, in your creative process, or just in your day to day? Yeah, what role does a support system play?
I think, I mean, it helps with perspective, because it's just impossible to know like where you're at with your moods at any given. I mean, it's not like you can kind of be like, whoa, I just did that, but it's if you're checking in with people, it's really helpful, especially if they're your family. Um, and yeah, like just that feeling of like people know is really nice. Like it used to be, you know, you don't want anyone to know because they'll think you're crazy, and it's like it's definitely way less lonely for people to know, and then they can be like, oh, he's just like feeling sad right now, not like, oh, he's unreliable, but more like he'll be okay.
Mhm. It's also really important to have somebody that you trust that can actually say to you, like, I think you're in the middle of a depressive episode, or I think you're in the middle of a manic episode, in a way that I would encourage clients to practice with a support system where even just saying, like, these are the words that I want you to use that I know will make me realize that you're being serious and honest with me. I
Mhm.
had a longtime client who, when he would get to a certain point that would make him realize it, he knew that he would then turn his keys over to his significant other to make sure he wouldn't
Mhm.
drive. And if she just simply said, I need your keys, then he knew the kind of their rule was he had 24 hours to establish if that was a good decision or not. And he
Mhm.
really just got to the point knowing that if she said something that he knew that he was probably doing something showing some manic symptoms.
Mhm.
But like Robbie said, it's really hard to monitor your mood just on a day-to-day basis if it's not rapid cycling. Even just like during the winter when it gets darker out earlier, you tend to maybe have a little bit more of depressive feelings. So like with the seasons changing and the times changing, the weather changing, just to think about monitoring yourself can be really hard. And there needs to be one person somewhere in your life that you can even just call and say, this is the thought that just went through my head, and I just need you to give me some real feedback on it.
Yeah.
So important to have. I love what you were saying, Robbie, about just having someone there for perspective. I think is so important because especially when you're in that depressive state and you're in that downward spiral, it's so easy to feel like this is how it's always going to feel. It's never going to change. It's never going to feel better. And so to have a support system there to let you know, like, this is going to pass. You've been here before. You've been out of it before. I think it's so important to have.
I,
It's cool.
I have a question, Robbie,
Yeah.
or Tara, both of you.
Yeah.
When you started to kind of talk about your bipolar diagnosis, I'm curious what type of pressure you felt to kind of combat the stigma. So, like many people who, once they get diagnosed with any sort of disorder, it's very common to kind of say, like, this is how I'm going to fight it. This is why I'm not going to let it do this, this, and this. But it's very also common, especially like in therapy, to talk about the things where, yes, I just realized that I have manic episodes, but sometimes I really like them. And I think we need to talk about the fact that it's not all bad. And the fact that I enjoy them is also kind of a problem in and of itself. And I'm just curious what type of like pressure or stigma you felt to kind of explain how you were going to combat it rather than also kind of discuss just like what it's like living with it and not always having it be such a problem.
I, I mean, I love talking about it. It's like as soon as I figured out what it was, I was like, let's talk about it. This is so fascinating. I bought all of the books, you know, I was just like, what are the books? And I found the books and read all the books because it was just like, it was like finding out you're like a prince or something. Like just finding out that you're like this whole thing that you didn't know about, or you were actually adopted or whatever. Like
Hmm.
it was just like I want all the books about what this is so I can learn about myself. And then I wanted to talk about it with other people, and like, and then eventually you find someone who's like, I think I might be that, and then you
Hmm.
can talk about it and be like, here's what I've learned, and you should read this. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's almost like a little community of people who experienced this
Hmm.
and never knew how to talk about it. Um, yeah, and the more
Hmm.
you talk about it, the more you find people, and then you can learn and share.
Yeah.
That was a great question, Ari. And that actually, Robbie, I want to know, you mentioned books, but I want to know, have there been resources or communities that have helped you out in the creative, in the music industry, specifically regarding bipolar disorder?
Um, yeah, I mean, I have friends who I like check in with because they have experienced it. And just be like, how's it going? Or somebody can be like, hey, like, I'm thinking of doing this. Like, is that a bad call? Like, because there's talking to people for perspective who aren't bipolar, and then there's talking to people who are bipolar for perspective. It's like also a nice resource to have. And to be that for somebody else, like just somebody who's like experienced that, whether they're on medication now or whether they aren't, like they've been through a period where they weren't, even if they're, like we've all been through the thing, whether or not we're like dealing with it. So yeah, I love having a little community of people who we've kind of shared that with each other, because you can share it with the general public and then you can really share it with other people who've like experienced it.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's why like 12-step programs, not to compare this to an addiction, but it's why AA and NA meetings are so successful, because people feel like they can go in and say like, these are the things I did that I'm really not proud of, that also my psychiatrist is not going to diagnose, and I need support with that kind of thing. And to be able to relate to something like that, especially in these types of situations where it's a mood disorder, it's a chemical imbalance, it's something that's causing a lot of this. It's just nice to have somebody out there who you can really relate to and understand, and they can say like, oh yeah, I've seen how that's happened, or I've seen how that's affected you, or I recognize that that wasn't you, 5 years ago.
Yeah, it is there is a similarity to like an informal support group, kind of without the sitting in a circle. They probably do have support groups for it that I've never done that, but that must be a thing.
They exist. They're all. If you ever need to find support groups, I'm sure you can find any of them online. But yes, they are. It's the purpose is to build communities and to eventually build even like the sponsorship ideas. Where if you think it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you can't sleep and you're in the midst of the peak of a manic episode, to have a sponsor or support out there just to even kind of help regulate yourself, even just to do some breath work with, to get things just kind of started on the path of re-regulating. Um, it's really important, again, just to have somebody out there that can help with something like that.
Yeah, I
And
should
also
say too,
just
like, oh, go ahead.
I was just the last thing, it was and many people who, when they first recognize that they're experiencing these kind of things, the first thing that they try, or the first thing that is encouraged, is medication, which is great. But also to recognize that medication alone is a third of the way effective. Therapy alone is half the way effective, 3/4 of the way, but medication and therapy on a consistent regimen are by far the most effective combination, just to provide you with the physical tools to be able to get to a point of regulating, and then also be able to learn the coping skills and the mental health tools to be able to then actually utilize those and keep yourself regulated.
Yeah, I would throw like physical health on top of that too. Like
Absolutely.
yoga really helps me, meditation really helps, like going on walks really helps. Like sitting around and not sleeping is like the worst. Like if you play video games till 4 o'clock in the morning every night, and like it's like not good for it. Like it's just
Yeah.
it's really makes you go to a really dark place.
Yeah.
Ari, what are some key things family members can do, or friends, when supporting a loved one with bipolar disorder?
I think the biggest thing, not to use the definition or the word in the definition, but I think just being able to recognize that support is really important, and to be out there to understand that there are times where the person might miss a family event because maybe they realize that they're in the midst of a manic episode and just don't feel it's appropriate to be in a public setting,
Mm.
or in a group setting, or in a family setting, or going to sit at a diner for dinner is probably just not going to turn out well. So they've been able to recognize through coping skills or just general knowledge and experience. So sometimes those cancellations or those requests um, are um, are not always something that they want to do, or they're not just flaking or bailing. It's something that really is appropriate and required. Also, to realize that you might see somebody in a depressive or a manic mood, and it's okay to talk to them about it. Recognize that if somebody is in a manic episode, they might not be as willing to acknowledge it as quickly as somebody who's in a depressive episode, but to then just come to them in a very caring and saying like, it seems to me like you're really in a manic episode, and or if there's something you need to help regulate you, that's when I'm here. Because just because they are in a manic episode doesn't mean they aren't hearing you. It's just that the attention and the energy level is so high that the focus might not be there at this very moment. And then also at times recognize that just to make sure whatever you can do to help keep them safe. So whether that's taking keys, staying on the phone with them for a little bit while they just get to a place, checking in on them, once or twice while they're in the middle of something, is just going to be really important. The bigger and better the support system, the education that you get as a family member to go and take a class, watch a YouTube video from a registered organization that works with this type of thing. Just any knowledge that you get is just better equipped that you're going to the better equipped you're going to be when the problem happens or when anything happens. And just the last thing is to recognize that if somebody's in the midst of a manic episode or a depressive episode, you're probably not going to solve it right now. So there is no quick fix. There's no like, let's get you out of this and get you to where you need to be. To recognize it is really just the beginning of an uphill battle that's gonna happen, but it's not just gonna happen today.
That's so important. I feel like for a lot of folks, when they do see maybe they're in that situation, they want to fix things right away. And just to know, like, you're not going to be able to fix this in the moment. And so, to really show that person grace and also to educate yourself on it as to how to best, be the support that the individual needs. I think that's crucial.
Yeah. And the local NAMI, so the National Association for Mental Illness, I believe pretty much every county in the country has a local chapter, and many of them have support groups for family members of people suffering from mental illness or also people with mental illness. So to look up those kind of resources, even if you are not the person with the disorder, but you're living with somebody or have a close friend or family member, try them out, see what you think. A lot of them are virtual nowadays, and don't require any kind of like camera or microphone on it. It's there for you just to participate. So they are there for you to try, and they generally tend to be very welcoming to people coming in because they're excited to have somebody else to be able to contribute.
I would even say, like, with the idea of fixing it, like that's maybe it's better to think of it as like managing it, even like in the forever term, like not like you can't fix it right now. It's like you can't fix it ever, maybe. Like you just find a way to kind of manage it, and it's part of who they are. And yeah, just finding a way to live with it, like any personality aspect, and make it manageable and put it in a place where it's like they can be as reliable as possible and not want to die, like, and not make terrible decisions. Like, let's get this to a place where I can live my life.
I love that we're having this conversation because, like you just said, Robby, it's so important to realize that this is a lifelong it's lifelong, it's not something that you'll, like Ari was saying, you take medication, it's going to go away, or you do therapy and medication, it's still not going to go away. But managing and being able to get to a level place where you're not so high, so low, and where you're able to actually enjoy the life that you have. And I think these conversations are so important in being able to normalize mental health disorders in general, but specifically bipolar disorder, because it is the most common and yet still the most stigmatized, even though we as a society have absolutely gotten better at being able to speak about it and properly support. But I think that these conversations are so important.
Yeah, and there is something that's like a little wonderful about it, like that it's like you can kind of like feel extremes like a little bit more than if you were just like this all the time, like just the different like extremes of like human experience, but just being able to like make that something where you can also live your life and like not just go totally off the rails is the price you pay for being a whatever magical artist person. Like it's just like, how can I like take that and make it so I can still like live with this thing that is like a part of who I am, but like also be able to be a good partner and friend and like want to not kill yourself and not buy an airplane, like
It's so refreshing to hear you actually call it wonderful. I think
Yeah,
we
I don't.
need.
Calling it a disorder is weird to me a little bit. Like,
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
just like to say like
that's so
bipolar.
great to hear. Gosh,
Mhm.
that's really beautiful to hear because I don't feel, like we actually hear that side of things regarding bipolar. So thank you. That's amazing to hear.
Yeah, and it's
So,
dangerous to just lean super into that too. So I'm hedging it because it's kind of
right.
like that part's beautiful, and you have to find a way to live your life and not let
Mhm.
it let it consume you a little bit, because it
Mhm.
it can. Like when you're manic, you're like, I would never give this away, and it's just like maybe you can have that and not have it be like
Mhm.
the horrible repercussions of it. Like have some of it, like not just eat like steak every night because it's the most delicious. So like
Right.
Find some
balance it
kind of
out.
balance. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have had a good handful of clients who have been very productive with manic episodes and their depressive episodes. They learned how to just like, for lack of a, get up, go to work, tough it out, and just kind of manage it. And a lot of that came from therapy and reframing and normalizing their feelings. But it was not uncommon for them to log on and say like, so I painted my entire basement and I think it looks great. And I've been talking with my wife about doing it and it took me forever. But then I hit I was up all night, but I did it. And I don't want to go through this again. But hey, at least I painted my basement. And just to be able to have that conversation of like, I'm glad that they didn't impact you to the point where now you're frustrated, upset, you didn't make some terrible decision, you utilize that energy for something that now you can utilize in a better way, is part of the process of what you're going through. And the more you practice it and the more you learn to manage it, then the shorter those periods can become and the better you can manage it to use that energy. But when you don't pay attention to it at all, that's when you go by an airplane because you're just not rationalizing the energy that you have.
Mm.
Mhm.
We're going to wrap up with one last question. Robby, has your experience with bipolar influenced your career decisions and your trajectory?
I mean, it certainly did before I was on medication. Like, um, big promises and not being able to fulfill them a lot of the time.
Hmm.
But uh, yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, it's definitely like influences my like instinctive creativity. I think just in like because it's always there. It's like how much of it do I want,
Hmm.
Um, uh, and then I don't know. Yeah, like well, I don't know. That's a really hard question actually because uh yes and a little bit. Like
Mm,
I'm sure it has but I try and be aware of it at all
Hmm.
times. Like and be like forgiving of myself like if I have a meeting or something, go in and like don't do great. It might be because I was like kind of down here. Um
mm,
and so yes, like it's influenced uh probably the way I've been. Like maybe I did an amazing show one night and not an amazing show another night. And hopefully the amazing show was the one at the festival with the 10,000 people and not in the coffee shop with 3 people. But, you know, I don't know. But like just being able to like forgive yourself for that and like take when you're, and I don't know how much of that is bipolar versus just like normal doing
Hmm.
well in any given situation. But yeah, I'm sure like where I am influences because I'm never going to be able to be like I'm going to be the same all the time with this magic medication pill. But then being like, okay, sometimes I'm going to be amazing and sometimes I'm going to be less amazing. But I've gotten this to a place where I'm not going to like not go to the meeting
Hmm.
or not play the show. You know?
And also, even people who don't have bipolar disorder have really shitty days sometimes and have really like shockingly like, I have so much energy today that I feel shot out of a cannon. And so to realize
Right.
that like just because you're having a really great day or you're having a really bad day doesn't mean you're in the midst of either one of those manic or depressive episodes. Like sometimes you just have a shitty day. It's raining outside, it's October, it's 4:30 and it's already
Yeah.
dark outside. Like today just is a wash and I want to be in my sweatpants all day. Like that's okay. And some of those days you kind of have to acknowledge and utilize because when you can also see the fluctuation that can happen with good and bad days, then you can actually see the difference in the manic and the depressive episodes. So
And so, or
part of
you
this,
can be like, I think I might be manic right now, and you're like, oh no, wait, I just drank 3 cups of coffee. Like,
right. But those are really important, and that's where like the mood tracking, even if you can find mood tracking online, they're really very simple.
yeah,
There are apps, and it says like, did anything encourage this mood bump? And you're like, oh, I did just have 3 cups of
mm,
coffee. No wonder I'm shaking.
Yeah.
that's
And
great.
so,
Yeah,
yeah, so it's just to also normalize the idea that like bad days happen and great days happen, and sometimes you're gonna have a shitty performance, and sometimes you're gonna knock it out of the park, and it's just
hmm,
that's also part of just basic mood. If you didn't fluctuate, you'd be perfect, and perfect doesn't exist.
Right.
yeah,
So just give yourself grace
Hmm. Hmm.
every day. I want to
yeah.
thank both of you so much for sharing this with us and for this, incredible conversation and honesty about something that really just needs to be normalized. And I'm hoping that by continuing to have these conversations just like this, that we start to, just end the stigma around bipolar 1 and 2, which I did not know that existed before this conversation. So I really want to thank you both so much for all sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your perspective.
Thanks
Thanks
for
for having
having me.
us.
This has been great.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hi, Tara.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thank you for that wonderful conversation.
Yeah, that was really, really insightful. I personally learned a lot. Just like I was telling them, I didn't know that there was, different categories for bipolar. And so just kind of recognizing and seeing like the differences between the manic and depressive episodes and the levels of that is just really great to know, whether you're dealing with it yourself or a loved one. It's very common. So we all know someone who probably is bipolar, and so I think it's so crucial to kind of know the differences and also how to support someone who's maybe experiencing an episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved the way the conversation toward the end went toward forgiveness, and you said the word grace, and just both Robbie and Ari were talking about that idea of I mean, just being human, regardless of the specifics of any of our lives. We all have ups and downs, and if they're more extreme or they're more less extreme, whatever it is, either way, that idea of forgiving ourselves and just having that grace, allowing ourselves to have the fluctuations instead of beating ourselves up. Oh, that was a terrible show. Oh, that was a great session. Just celebrate the good times, and I guess learn from, or take what we can from the harder times.
Yeah, I think it's so important, especially in an industry that can feel just incredibly stressful. There's a lot of pressures
Absolutely.
the music industry, and I think it's important to remember, you're not always going to be at your best, and maybe you'll knock a show out of the park, or maybe you'll say something really off in a meeting, but that happens. That like Ari said, none of us are perfect. That doesn't exist. And so I think really allowing yourself to have those good days, have those bad days, and I'm really hoping that this industry, we're starting to see progress. I'm hoping that it continues and that we're able to kind of change the attitude of that this industry has held for so long about perfection, about showing up and being able to show up every time, because there are days where you
Productivity.
can't. Yeah.
Right,
So
this industry demands a high, or has been, has demanded a high level, an inhuman amount of productivity,
yeah,
um and hasn't really allowed. I mean, even just that idea of productivity, sometimes you're incredibly productive, whether you're in a manic episode or not, and painting the basement, or you know whether you're just having a very productive time. And yeah, we can't all function at that level, and shouldn't be functioning at that level all the time.
right. So thank you for, these kinds of conversations are so important and so necessary, to hopefully just let others know, like, one, you're not alone if you're also experiencing this, but also let's just keep normalizing mental health in all the ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Terra, thank you so much for another great conversation, our July Fireside Chat. I can't wait to hear what we talk about next month, next session. But until I see you next time, take good care.
Thank you. Likewise.
Yeah. And thank you everybody here for watching, whether you watched it live or you're watching on the replay. Thank you so much for being here. You can find out more about the SONA Foundation and about Backline at sonafoundation.com. And on our website, there's information that you can find out about past fireside chats with all of our past topics and guests, with links to our YouTube channel where everything has been recorded and uploaded. Also our new TAP grant program, where we're providing grants for financial assistance paid directly to the therapists. So for songwriters specifically who need help getting therapy. And we also have programs in financial wellness and career development. So all of that is at sonafoundation.com. And our friends over at backline.care, we love them. They do a lot of great work in the world, helping everybody in the music industry with mental health concerns of various kinds. So I encourage you to explore their website as well. And we have links to their website at our website and all this stuff. So we're all friends here. So that's it. Thank you so much for being with us, and hope you're on our mailing list. If you are not, please join so that you can find out about next month's guests, next month's topics, and we will see you there. Take good care.